When test pilot Lyman Bullard first flew the prototype on May 29, 1940, he pushed it past 400 miles per hour, making it the first single-seat fighter to break that barrier in level flight. It was 50 miles per hour faster than the German Bf-109E. Its 2,000 horsepower Pratt and Whitney double Wasp engine could power through the sky with devastating speed and range. But speed meant nothing if you couldn't land without dying. The problems became apparent immediately. That massive engine required an enormous propeller, 13 feet, 4 inches of spinning death that needed clearance from the ground. Vaught's solution was the inverted gull-wing design, an engineering compromise that shortened the landing gear while maintaining propeller clearance. It looked distinctive. It looked aggressive. It also created a nightmare. The cockpit had to be positioned far back in the fuselage to balance the aircraft's weight. This meant pilots sat behind the wing's trailing edge, giving them approximately the forward visibility of a cave. The framed birdcage canopy only made things worse. During carrier approaches, when pilots needed to see the landing signal officer giving them critical hand signals, they were essentially flying blind. Then there was the bounce. The landing gear oleo struts were too stiff. When a Corsair hit a carrier deck, it didn't settle. It rebounded like a basketball, often bouncing so high that the tailhook couldn't catch the arresting wire. Pilots would watch in horror as their aircraft hopped across the deck, heading straight for the barrier or, worse, other parked planes. If the bounce didn't kill you, the stall characteristics might. The inverted gull wing interfered with elevator authority, making the aircraft difficult to recover from spins. More terrifying was the Corsair's tendency to drop its left wing without warning during slow-speed flight, exactly the speeds required for carrier landings. Advance the throttle suddenly during an aborted landing attempt, and that left wing could snap down so fast that the plane would flip before you could react. The enormous torque from that double Wasp engine made it a handful even for experienced pilots. Inexperienced ones? They had no chance. The Navy tried. God, they tried. But after Lieutenant Commander Sam Porter's terrifying qualification attempts aboard USS Sangamon in fall 1942, for landings that nearly killed him, the verdict was clear: the Corsair was not ready for carriers. Navy squadrons VF-12 and VF-17 both attempted to make it work. Both failed to fully qualify the aircraft for fleet service. The Navy, desperate for a reliable carrier fighter after heavy losses at Coral Sea and Midway, made a pragmatic decision: give the carriers the docile, user-friendly Grumman F-6F Hellcat instead. The Hellcat was slower, but it landed like a dream. As for the Corsairs? Ship them to the Marines fighting from island airstrips in the South Pacific. Let them figure it out. If they crashed on a runway, at least they wouldn't take a carrier with them. The Corsair arrived in the Solomon Islands with a reputation as a killer, of enemy aircraft, sure, but also of American pilots who were foolish enough to trust it. The man who shouldn't have been there. Gregory Boyington was born on December 4, 1912, in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. His childhood was rough. His parents divorced when he was young, and money was always tight. But at age 6, something happened that changed his life forever. He went up in an airplane with a barnstormer pilot named Clyde Pangborn, who would later become famous for making the first non-stop flight across the Pacific Ocean. That flight lit a fire in young Greg that never went out. He excelled at wrestling in high school in Tacoma, Washington, then earned a degree in aeronautical engineering from the University of Washington in 1934. He joined the Reserve Officers Training Corps and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Coast Artillery Reserve. But the Army wouldn't let him fly because he was married, a restriction that seemed designed to torture a man who dreamed of nothing but aviation. In 1936, Boyington found his solution. He resigned from the Army and enlisted as an aviation cadet in the Marine Corps Reserve. He earned his wings on March 11, 1937, and by all accounts was an exceptional pilot. Fast, aggressive, fearless to the point of recklessness. He was also a hellraiser. The drinking started early. So did the gambling. Once, completely drunk, he stripped naked and tried to swim across San Diego Bay in the middle of the night. But before that, please subscribe to the channel and like it to spread forgotten stories. Get to the point. His buddies had to fish him out before he drowned. Another time, he punched a superior officer in the face during an argument over a woman, not his wife. He loved to start wrestling matches in crowded bars. He challenged everyone and backed down from no one. By 1941, Boyington was drowning in debt and desperate for money. When the Central Aircraft Manufacturing Company, soon to become the famous Flying Tigers, offered American military pilots contracts to fly in China against the Japanese, Boyington jumped at it. The pay was good, $600 a month plus $500 for every confirmed kill. He resigned his Marine commission and headed to Burma with the 1st American Volunteer Group, the legendary mercenary unit led by Claire Chennault. The Flying Tigers became icons of American aviation, but Boyington's time there was complicated. He claimed 6 aerial victories. His commander, Chennault, officially credited him with only 2 aircraft destroyed in the air and 1.5 on the ground. More troubling were the personality conflicts. Chennault disliked and distrusted Boyington, considering him unreliable. Other pilots in the squadron called him a liar and a drunk. Whether fair or not, the reputation stuck. When the Flying Tigers disbanded in July 1942, Boyington returned to the United States with his debts still mounting and his personal life in shambles. The Marine Corps, desperate for experienced combat pilots, took him back. On September 29, 1942, he was recommissioned as a major. But his reputation had followed him home. He was assigned to administrative positions with Marine Fighter Squadrons 122 and 112. During his entire time with VMF 122, he shot down 0 enemy aircraft. 0. For a combat ace returning from China, that assignment was a humiliation. By mid-1943, Boyington was pushing 31 years old, ancient by fighter pilot standards. Most pilots in the Pacific were barely out of their teens, 22 or 23 at most. Boyington was already balding. His body showed the wear of hard living. He should have been behind a desk somewhere, training younger pilots or pushing papers at a headquarters unit. Instead, someone gave him a second chance. Or maybe a last chance. In August 1943, the Marine Corps needed someone to take command of Marine Fighter Squadron 214 on the island of Espiritu Santo in the New Hebrides. The squadron had been deactivated due to lack of planes, parts, and pilots. Boyington saw an opportunity and seized it. He convinced his superiors to reconstitute VMF 214 and put him in charge. His pilots weren't exactly elite. The 27 men who reported to VMF 214 were a collection of cast-offs, replacements, green pilots fresh from training, and troublemakers who'd been shuffled from other squadrons. Some had never seen combat. Others had seen too much and carried the scars. They were the pilots nobody else wanted, men who didn't fit the mold, who broke rules, who drank too much or fought too often or asked too many questions. Someone dubbed them the Black Sheep Squadron. The name stuck. As for Boyington, his new pilots took one look at this balding, hard-drinking, 31-year-old commander and nicknamed him Gramps. Later, someone adapted the Whiff and Puff song with new lyrics, and Gramps became Pappy. War correspondents loved it. Pappy Boyington and his Black Sheep. It sounded like something out of a movie. There was just one problem: they had to fly the Corsair. The plane nobody wanted. The Widowmaker. First Blood. Pappy Boyington's leadership philosophy was brutally simple: never ask your men to do something you wouldn't do yourself. In fact, go further. Always take the worst mission, the most dangerous flight, the aircraft in the poorest condition. On every mission, Boyington flew the Corsair that was in the worst shape. The one with the engine that ran rough. The one with the guns that jammed. The one that vibrated like it was coming apart at the seams. His pilots rarely flew the same aircraft twice. They rotated through whatever was available. But Pappy always took the worst one. It endeared him to his men instantly. Here was a commander who wouldn't hide behind rank or age. He'd lead from the front, take the first bullet, absorb the first risk. The black sheep would follow him anywhere. They flew their first combat mission on September 14, 1943, escorting dive bombers on a raid against a Japanese supplied base. It was routine. A milk run. Getting everyone used to the aircraft and the procedures. 2 days later, everything changed. On September 16, Boyington and his black sheep escorted another bomber formation. This time, Japanese fighters rose to meet them. Mitsubishi A6M0s, the legendary aircraft that had dominated the Pacific in the early years of the war. The Zero was lighter than the Corsair, more maneuverable at slow speeds, and had a mystique that made Allied pilots nervous. But the Corsair had advantages the Zero couldn't match. Speed, firepower, structural strength. And in Pappy Boyington's hands, it became a weapon of surgical precision. In that single mission, Boyington shot down 5 Japanese aircraft. 5. In one sortie. He became one of the very few American pilots to achieve ace in a day. 5 kills in a single mission. For most aviators, that would be the crowning achievement of an entire career. For Pappy Boyington, it was just the beginning. The black sheep had found their rhythm. The Corsair, that supposedly obsolete death trap, had found pilots who understood it. The aircraft demanded constant attention, yes. It required skill and nerve to master. But once you learned its quirks, once you respected its power, the Corsair became something beautiful and terrible. It was fast enough to dictate the terms of engagement. If you didn't want to fight, you could dive away and nothing could catch you. If you wanted to fight, you could climb above the enemy and strike from altitude, using the Corsair's superior speed to slash through enemy formations. The 6.50 caliber machine guns in the wings delivered devastating firepower. The aircraft's rugged construction meant it could absorb damage that would shred a Zero. Most importantly, the Corsair excelled at exactly the kind of fighting Boyington loved: aggressive, high-speed, offensive tactics. He taught his pilots to forget the old dogfighting rules. Don't try to outturn a Zero, you can't. Instead, use speed and altitude. Strike hard, strike fast, and don't get sucked into slow-speed turning fights where the lighter Japanese fighters had the advantage. The kills started piling up. During VMF 214's first tour of combat duty in the Rabaul area, the Black Sheep shot down 23 Japanese aircraft in their first 2 weeks of operation. Boyington personally shot down 14 enemy fighters in 32 days. By late September, the squadron had established itself as one of the most effective units in the South Pacific. But their reputation came with a price. 5 Black Sheep pilots were lost during those first weeks. Combat in the Solomons was brutal, unforgiving. Every mission was a deadly chess game played at 300 miles per hour, where one mistake meant death. The day they laughed. October 17, 1943, dawned hot and humid over the Solomon Islands. Pappy Boyington had a plan that morning, and it was completely insane. The Japanese had a major airfield at Kahili, near the southern tip of Bougainville Island. Intelligence reported approximately 60 enemy aircraft grounded there: fighters, bombers, reconnaissance planes. It was a major staging base for Japanese operations in the region, heavily defended by anti-aircraft batteries and always on alert for Allied raids. Standard doctrine would be to approach at low altitude, hit fast, and get out before the Japanese could scramble their fighters. Maybe strafe some parked aircraft if you got lucky. Don't give the enemy time to organize a defense. Boyington had a different idea. What if we just asked them to fight? He led a formation of 24 Corsairs, Black Sheep pilots along with other Marine squadrons, north toward Bougainville. But instead of approaching low and fast, they climbed to high altitude and formed up in a loose V formation that looked like unescorted dive bombers. They circled the airfield. Slowly. Deliberately. Like they were sightseeing. Down below, Japanese ground crews stared up in confusion. What were the Americans doing? Were they lost? Were they insane? Some of Boyington's pilots could speak Japanese, and they knew some Japanese pilots could understand English. As they circled, Boyington reportedly called out taunts over the radio, goading the Japanese to send up their fighters. Come on! Come up and fight! What are you waiting for? It was psychological warfare mixed with pure audacity. The Japanese couldn't ignore such a blatant challenge. To do so would be shameful. Moreover, 24 enemy fighters circling your airfield at high altitude represented both an insult and a tactical opportunity. If they could scramble enough zeros, they could outnumber and destroy the impudent Marines. 60 Japanese fighters took the bait. They came up angry, climbing hard to meet the Corsairs. The Americans had altitude advantage, but the Japanese had numbers, 60 versus 24, more than 2-to-1 odds. As the Zeros climbed toward combat altitude, the Marines must have felt their hearts pounding. This wasn't a planned engagement. This was a fur ball about to happen, the kind of chaotic melee where planes came from every direction and staying alive depended on split-second decisions and constant situational awareness. The two formations collided like storm fronts. What followed was one of the most spectacular aerial engagements of the Pacific War. Corsairs dove through the climbing Zeros, their 6.50 caliber machine guns blazing. The heavy American fighters used their speed advantage to slash through the Japanese formation, fire a burst, and keep moving before the more nimble Zeros could bring their lighter armament to bear. Boyington was everywhere, his Corsair weaving through the dogfight like a predator among prey. Japanese fighters exploded under concentrated machine gun fire. Others spun away trailing smoke and flame, their pilots trying desperately to reach friendly territory before their aircraft disintegrated. The Marines worked together with lethal precision. They practiced mutual support, never leave your wingman, always check 6, call out bogeys. The Corsairs' superior speed meant they could dictate engagement range. If a Zero got on someone's tail, a wingman would come screaming in from above to break up the attack. The Japanese, despite their numerical superiority, were flying into a buzzsaw. The Marines were aggressive, coordinated, and flying aircraft that perfectly matched Boyington's tactics. Speed. Firepower. Strike and move. Don't get slow. Don't get trapped. 20 minutes after the battle began, the sky was clear. 20 Japanese aircraft had been shot down. Not damaged. Not probably destroyed. Shot down, confirmed kills witnessed by multiple pilots, wreckage seen hitting the ground or water. And the Black Sheep? Not a single loss. 24 Corsairs climbed back to altitude and headed south toward their base. All 24 returned safely. On the ground at Kahili, Japanese commanders must have stared in disbelief at the burning wreckage of a third of their fighter strength. The Americans had deliberately challenged them to battle, then systematically destroyed them without losing a single aircraft. 9 kills. The actual number of aircraft Boyington personally shot down that day has been reported differently by various sources. Official records credit him with several kills during the engagement, contributing to the squadron's overall victory. But what matters isn't the precise accounting, it's what the Kahili raid represented. This was the Corsairs' vindication. The Widowmaker, that the Navy had rejected, The death trap that test pilots had refused to fly had just proven itself in the most spectacular fashion possible. In the hands of Marines who understood its strengths and accepted its demands, the F-4U wasn't obsolete, it was the most lethal fighter in the South Pacific. The squadron's performance at Kahili earned Boyington the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration. The citation specifically mentioned the October 17th engagement, leading 24 fighters over Kahili, persistently circling the airdrome where 60 hostile aircraft were grounded, boldly challenging the Japanese to send up planes. Under his brilliant command, the fighters shot down 20 enemy craft without the loss of a single ship. But there's a deeper story in those numbers. Boyington's personal kill total was climbing rapidly. By December 27, 1943, he had 25 confirmed victories. The pressure was mounting. World War I ace Eddie Rickenbacker held the American record with 26 kills. Could Boyington tie it? Could he break it? The media started following his every mission. War correspondents wanted to know when he'd get that record-breaking kill. The weight of expectation settled on Boyington's shoulders like lead. The final mission. On January 3, 1944, 48 American fighters, including a division of 4 Black Sheep Corsairs, took off from Bougainville for a fighter sweep over Rabaul. Boyington was the tactical commander of the entire formation. They arrived over the Japanese base at 8 a.m. Enemy fighters rose to meet them, and Boyington waded into the combat with his characteristic aggression. Witnesses saw him shoot down his 26th aircraft, tying Rickenbacker's record. Then he went after another, determined to break the record that had stood since the First World War. In the general melee of diving, swooping, dogfighting aircraft, Pappy Boyington shot down his 27th plane. Then his 28th. He was now America's leading fighter ace. Then the Zeros swarmed him. Outnumbered and with his ammunition running low, Boyington found himself in trouble. His wingman, Captain George Ashman, was shot down and killed. Boyington's Corsair took hits. Smoke poured from the engine. He was going down. Other pilots saw him bail out, his parachute blossoming against the blue Pacific sky. Then he hit the water and disappeared from view. Search aircraft looked for him for days but found nothing. On January 8, 1944, Gregory, Pappy, Boyington was officially declared missing in action and presumed dead. The Black Sheep Squadron flew its last combat mission 5 days after losing their commander. The squadron was disbanded, its pilots scattered to other units. In their brief existence, just 84 days of combat operations, VMF 214 had destroyed or damaged 203 enemy aircraft. 8 pilots became aces, with 97 confirmed air-to-air kills among them. President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the paperwork awarding Boyington the Medal of Honor in March 1944. It was believed to be posthumous. The truth. Pappy Boyington wasn't dead. A Japanese submarine had spotted his parachute and surfaced to retrieve him. He spent the next 20 months as a prisoner of war, held at facilities in Rabaul, Truk, and finally a Mori prison camp near Tokyo. The conditions were brutal. Prisoners were beaten, starved, and subjected to psychological torture. Boyington endured it all, wondering if anyone even knew he was alive. On August 29, 1945, after the atomic bombs and Japan's surrender, American forces liberated Amori. Boyington walked out of captivity gaunt and exhausted but very much alive. He returned to the United States on September 12, 1945, to discover he was famous. The media had built him into a legend during his absence. The Marine Corps had promoted him to lieutenant colonel while he was imprisoned. 21 former Black Sheep pilots met him when his ship docked. And on October 5, 1945, President Harry S. Truman presented him with the Medal of Honor at the White House, one of the few instances in American history where a posthumous Medal of Honor was presented to a living recipient. Boyington also received the Navy Cross for his actions on January 3, 1944, when he led that final formation of Allied fighters into combat against vastly superior numbers over Rebel. The Corsair's redemption. The F-4U Corsair went on to become one of the greatest naval fighters in history, but it took time. The British Royal Navy, receiving Corsairs through Lend-Lease in late 1943, actually developed some of the key techniques that made the aircraft safer for carrier operations. They figured out a curved landing approach that kept the landing signal officer in view. They wired shut certain cowl flaps to prevent oil and hydraulic fluid from obscuring the windshield. By 1944, with improved F-4U-1A and F-4U-1D variants featuring raised cockpits, bubble canopies, and modified landing gear, the U.S. Navy finally approved the Corsair for carrier operations. The aircraft that had been rejected as too dangerous became a carrier staple, remaining in production longer than any other World War II fighter. In combat, Corsairs achieved an 11-to-1 kill ratio against Japanese aircraft, one of the best records of any fighter in the war. They accounted for 2,140 enemy aircraft shot down, with only 189 Corsairs lost to enemy fighters. The aircraft served through the Korean War, where Marine Captain Jesse Fulmer famously shot down a MiG-15 jet while flying an aging F-4U-4B, a piston-engine fighter, defeating cutting-edge jet technology through pilot skill and determination. More than 12,500 Corsairs were built by 3 manufacturers between 1942 and 1952. The type served with 6 foreign nations, including France, which used them extensively in Indochina. The Japanese, who had faced them in combat, called the Corsair Whistling Death, because of the distinctive sound its wing root air intakes made during high-speed dives. The plane that Navy test pilots had called the Widowmaker became legendary precisely because men like Pappy Boyington refused to accept its limitations. They mastered its quirks, respected its power, and unleashed its devastating capabilities against an enemy who never saw them coming. After the war, Boyington's post-war life was complicated. He retired from the Marine Corps on August 1, 1947, with the rank of colonel. The fame was nice, but it couldn't heal the damage the war had done. He struggled with depression, alcoholism, and the challenge of returning to civilian life after years of combat and captivity. He wrote an autobiography, Baba Black Sheep, published in 1958, which became a national bestseller. In the 1970s, his story was adapted into a television series called Black Sheep Squadron, starring Robert Conrad. Boyington served as technical advisor for the show, though he acknowledged it was fiction based on reality. The real story was too dark, too violent, too psychologically complex for primetime television. Despite his struggles, Boyington remained connected to his fellow Marines and to the legacy of VMF 214. He attended reunions, gave talks, and never stopped being Pappy to the men who had served under him. He married 4 times, searching for the peace and stability that combat had taken from him. In 1994, 6 years after his death, Boyington was enshrined in the Naval Aviation Hall of Honor at the National Museum of Naval Aviation. The airport in his hometown of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, was renamed Pappy Boyington Field in 2007. His Medal of Honor is displayed at the Marines Memorial Club in San Francisco, donated by his widow. Thanks for watching. If you found this story interesting, please subscribe and like it, and join our community of history lovers. We want to hear your voice. Leave a comment on the video, tell us where you come from, or share any family history related to the war. You are not just a spectator, you are helping us spread the truth about the heroism of the war years. We read every comment, and they really inspire us to work. See you next time.